This podcast is produced by the Harwood Productions Podcast Network. To learn more about the network and to find more of our shows, visit us online at www.harwoodpodcast.com.
Hi, I'm Cindy Harris and welcome to Daily Bread. On this show, I'm going to be finding some great bread and biscuit recipes to show you that you can make in your own kitchen. Let's see what we're going to be baking today. Today I'm going to show you this delicious cottage dill bread. Now, before we get started, I want to talk about a couple of things, and the first thing is yeast. Now, in my recipes, I use active dry yeast, not the fast-rising kind. So that's the first thing. And then the second thing is, if you're going to be making some breads with me, get a little instant read thermometer. It's really important that your liquids be about the right temperature. So speaking of which, let's get started. We need to get some warm water out of the tap, and it needs to be between 110 and 115 degrees. And the temperature is kind of important because we don't want it to be too hot to where we kill the yeast. So once we get the right temperature, what I like to do is then pour off about a quarter of a cup into another measuring cup, and then put that into a small bowl. And then we just immediately open up one packet of our active dry yeast, because what we have to do is actually dissolve the yeast in this water, and that's why it's important that the water be at the right temperature. So once you get the yeast in the water, just use a little spoon or a little spatula, kind of stir it to kind of moisten it, and then we're just going to set it off to the side while we get the rest of our ingredients together. Now for this dill bread, I do like to put a little bit of finely minced onion in it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take, and get just about 2 tablespoons of onion. Now, the way I'm chopping it right now is fine for the first chop, but you're going to see this needs to be really fine. I actually, when you're eating the bread, I don't want you to even know that there is onion in it. Now, some people like to use dried minced onion and things like that, but I prefer the fresh. So it just takes a few minutes, but get it nice and fine. Then we're going to go ahead and measure out about 2 tablespoons. Now we can't put this onion in raw. We do have to saute it a little bit. So I'm just going to take a tablespoon of butter in a small saucepan. And then once that's melted and kind of foamy, I'm going to put my onion in. Now I'm going to let this saute on a medium heat for just about 3 or 4 minutes. I don't want it to brown. I just want it to start to cook the onion. Now, another one of the secret ingredients for this bread is some cottage cheese. Now, I need to measure out a cup of cottage cheese, but I want to get a 2% milk fat cottage cheese or low fat, and I do want it to be a small curd. Now, this is very cold, so we're going to warm it up by putting it into the little saucepan with our onions. Now, when I put the cottage cheese in, I like to then get my spatula and kind of stir it around. I don't want to leave this for too long because it will heat up to 110, 115 really quick. So once I get that onion mixed in with the cottage cheese, then again, I get my instant read thermometer, and I want it to be between 110 and 115 degrees. Then I want to get some fresh dill. Now, again, some people use dry dill. To me, it just is not the same. Dry dill almost smells like tobacco. So I like to get some fresh dill, and I chop that up, and I want to get about a quarter of a cup. And you'll notice I'm cutting it up not minced, but pretty darn fine. I don't want giant pieces of dill running through the bread. So now let's talk about flour. For most of my yeast breads, I use a better for bread type flour. It's a little bit sturdier than all-purpose flour, but if all you have is all-purpose, you can absolutely use that. I'm going to start by measuring out 2 cups, and then I'm going to measure out a half a cup. I don't know if I'm going to need this half a cup, but I want to have it on hand. And then I want to crack 1 egg into a small bowl, and I am going to kind of take a fork and break that up just a little bit. So look at our yeast. It's all nice and dissolved and foamy, so it's ready to go. Now, let's go back and take our temperature of the cottage cheese. Now, it's about 100, 101, 102. That works out fine. Oh, it's dipped down a little too much. So I'm just going to slide it back onto the warm burner, and it comes right back up. Again, we're looking to get it to be about 110 to 115 when we put it into the bowl with our ingredients. Now, when I'm making yeast bread, I always use my standing mixer, and I put on the dough hook that came with it. It makes it really, really easy. Then it's just a question of putting all the ingredients together. And I first start with the yeast, and then I put in the cottage cheese and onion mixture, and I just kind of turn the mixer on low and let the dough hook kind of go. And then I'm going to add a tablespoon of sugar, my dill, a teaspoon of salt, and an egg. And once that's all mixed together, then I'm going to go ahead and add my 2 cups of flour. Now you'll notice it's going to be a soft dough, but I'm looking to see if it comes together in a ball. So I'm going to test it, and see, it's not too sticky, but I am looking for it to be a little bit more of a ball, so I'm going to let it knead a little bit. Now, if it wasn't coming together like this, then I would start adding a little bit of that 1/2 cup of flour that I set aside. Now it's time to get our bread to rise a little bit. So what I do is I take a medium-sized bowl, and I put a little bit of canola oil in it and kind of move it around with a paper towel. And then I take my dough and I put it right into the bowl, just like this. Now, as it comes out of the bowl, it can get kind of unwieldy. So sometimes what I do is I don't want these little pieces of dough. I may sprinkle just a tad of flour because it be a little bit sticky on my hands. And I just kind of pat that in to a nice little ball like that. Then the next thing we want to do is cover this with a clean dish towel. Now, we need to let this rise in a warm place. I don't really have any place that's that consistent, so I'm going to use my microwave and turn it into a proofing box. And I take a cup of water and I let it get to a boil, and then I move it to the back of the microwave, and then I put my dough in, and I just close the door and set the timer for about an hour, and it's just going to rise there. And I also put a little note to people to not use the microwave. And then after its first rise, I bring it out and look at it's like doubled, which is great. So then the next thing I do is I punch it down to release those gases. Now it's time to bring it over to my board. I'm going to put just a little bit of flour, and I'm going to bring the dough out, and it's time to put it into the container that it's going to do its second rise and also bake in. Now you'll notice I'm just getting a little flour on my hands because I don't want it to be sticky. But I do like to touch the dough, kind of move it around a little bit. And then I have to decide what I'm going to bake it in. Now, you can absolutely use a traditional loaf pan, but I'm going to use a pie dish because I'd like to have a little round loaf. So again, we're going to oil the pan a little bit. Again, just a little of canola oil, move it around with a paper towel. We don't want it to swim in oil. We just want to kind of coat it. And once I get that nice and oiled, then I can go ahead and take my dough, kind of tuck the ends under, and put it right in the center. Now, by this point, our proofing box has cooled down. So if the water is not very warm, put it back in for about a minute, get it nice and hot, and then go ahead and move it to the back like we did before, and then you can take your loaf of bread and pop it right back into this proofing box. Now for the second rise, it's going to be much shorter, just a half an hour. Now, about 10 to 15 minutes before you take your dough out of the proofing box, get your oven hot to 350 degrees. You want the oven to be ready to go so that when you pull the bread out of the proofing box, it can go directly into the oven. We don't want to let it sit around. We don't want it to deflate. So you put it in your oven for about 40 to 45 minutes. Now, after about 40 minutes, this is what it should look like, nice and golden brown on the top. Now to check to see if it's done, give it a little bit of a thump and it should sound hollow. And if it is, it's done. Now I always like to make sure the bread is ready to come out, so I take my offset spatula and I kind of run it around, and then I immediately get the bread out of the pan. I don't want it to cook anymore, and I let it to sit and cool on my cooling rack. Now by this time, your home is going to be smelling amazing, and it's going to be all you can do to not cut into this bread, but don't. You need to wait for at least 30 minutes, and then you can absolutely start cutting it. Now for this bread, you could cut it into slices, but I like to cut it into wedges. Now this loaf easily makes 12 wedges or 12 servings of bread. If you're a family, you can cut it in half and eat half one night and then put it in some plastic. Don't put it in the refrigerator, just let it set on your counter and then you can eat the other half the next night. It holds up really well. You know, we're all really busy, and it's so easy to get a nice loaf of bread at the grocery store these days. But I have to tell you, maybe once or twice a month, try baking a loaf of bread. The smell is unbelievable in your house, and the flavor, you can't get some of these bread flavors at the bakery. And by using our modern conveniences, like the KitchenAid with the dough hook and then turning my microwave into a proof box, it's practically foolproof, and it doesn't take that long. I figure it takes about 3 hours total that I need to be available, and at the end, I have this delicious bread. So be brave, give it a try. Bread is absolutely one of life's most simple pleasures. And when you find a nice and easy way to do it, you're going to ask yourself, why have I not been doing this a little bit more often in my life? This cottage dill bread would be great as a sandwich or with a salad, or great with a nice bowl of soup. Thanks so much for watching today. If you'd like to get the recipe for the cottage dill bread we made today, just go to our website and I'll have the recipe there for you. I'll see you next time.